and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi meets with his DPRK counterpart and the country's top leader on a visit to Pyongyang. Could this be the diplomatic boost needed for progress in the anticipated DPRK-US summit? And a U.S. trade delegation led by U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin is in Beijing for talks. Could there be a solution in sight for lingering trade disputes? You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. We begin our show today in Pyongyang, North Korea, where Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with DPRK leader Kim Jong Un on Thursday. Wang is the highest-ranking Chinese official to travel to the DPRK in more than 10 years. Take a look at this.
Things are changing on the Korean Peninsula. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is wrapping up his two-day visit to Pyongyang. His trip comes at the invitation of his counterpart, Ri Yong-ho. The two foreign ministers met on Wednesday. On Thursday, Wang met with the DPRK leader Kim Jong Un and expressed hope that last week's inter-Korean summit brings the peninsula closer to a political solution. Wang also said China would support the DPRK's goal to denuclearize as well as efforts to grow the economy. Kim Jong Un said denuclearization is the country's ultimate goal, and he thanked China for efforts to achieve peace and stability on the peninsula.
China has always insisted on the denuclearized Korean Peninsula in order to maintain peace and stability in the region. We have always insisted on finding a solution that responds to the appropriate concerns of all relevant parties through dialogue and negotiation.
Meanwhile, both the DPRK and South Korea have started removing propaganda loudspeakers from the border, in line with the Panmunjom declaration signed by the two leaders in the summit. Weeks before the summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping met with DPRK leader Kim Jong Un in Beijing and agreed on a number of issues. China hopes the upcoming dialogue between the DPRK and the U.S. will be smooth and achieve substantial progress.
And we are doing things that are good. I think we'll have a meeting over the next 3 or 4 weeks. It's going to be a very important meeting. The denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula of North Korea.
President Trump suggested the Peace House in the demilitarized zone could be a site for his meeting with Kim. As he prepares for the meeting, he has hinted in a tweet that 3 Americans detained in the DPRK might be freed. It's a show of goodwill leading up to the anticipated talks between Kim and Trump.
So what message did Foreign Minister Wang Yi's trip sent to the world? That he is the first Chinese official going to Pyongyang in about 10 years. In Seoul, we have Professor Shen-Ling Li, if he is joining us already. There we go, from the Institute of International Studies at Fudan University. Welcome, Professor. In Washington, D.C., in the U.S., Dr. Yang-Ki Kim Renal, a senior advisor of the Institute for Korean Studies at George Washington University. Welcome. And in Boston, also in U.S., Jim Walsh from the Security Studies Program, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Welcome as well. Let me begin with you, Professor Shen. Chinese State Councilor, Foreign Minister Wang in Pyongyang. Here's what he said. He said DPRK is committed during his trip this time to denuclearization. He also talks about China's constructive role in making sure of this process. What is likely to be China's role, Professor Shen?
Well, at the beginning, we work with international community to press DPRK to feel pain. Therefore, it would have the pressure to decide to abandon nuclear weapon. But people don't know how to abandon. And this can be tricky, can be challenging. China say, I'm going to be a part of the international process, not only to force DPRK to abandon, but also to nurture. This will be a successful, fruitful, constructive process. So I'm going to be there. So Wang Yi tells we are going to be there.
All right. Mr. Walsh, the United States has not committed to anything yet about how a process of negotiation and discussion could begin. Well, DPRK, at least rhetorically, has been suggesting about how it would begin, at least by, quote, complete denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, end of quote. So, Mr. Walsh, is the U.S. going to offer anything, at least rhetorically or verbally?
Well, Tian, yes, and you're right to point out this has been a very unusual process we've seen. Most of the time, when you have a negotiation like this, the parties sit down at the negotiating table, and that's where they make their proposals, that they want this, or they're willing to give up that. What we've had in this case, however, has been quite different. North Korea, on, I'd say, maybe 4 or 5 different occasions, has offered up proposals in advance of the negotiations. The U.S. isn't obliged to respond to them. I think the DPRK is basically trying to set up the table, trying to create a good atmosphere, thus the reference perhaps to the release of U.S. detainees that could be happening any day now. I think it's making these gestures because it wants the summit to go well, but it all depends, as you rightly point out, on how you define denuclearization, and that's really going to be what the substance of the conversations are at the negotiating table. Who does what, when, and when are we going to complete this task? And I would point out finally that denuclearization is very important, ultimate goal here, but there are other goals that people don't talk about. The fact that the parties are talking in and of itself helps reduce the risk of accidental war. So I think there's some good things happening in addition to the fact that they're going to talk about denuclearization.
After all these celebration of the possible messages, I guess we need to get down to business. Dr. Kim Renaud, before the U.S. DPRK summit is to take place, there's likely, coming from South Korea, the latest message is high-level inter-Korean talks, likely to focus on some of the details building up to the DPRK-US summit, and likely to focus on some of the possible steps about drawing up this roadmap about so-called denuclearization. Can we expect anything specific?
Well, the process should be, I guess, not radical, but slow, but I think it's already a wonderful start because they have recognized each other as kind of a dialoguable friends, and this is a real change from the state, I mean, what we have been undergoing for a long time. So, first of all, when people say denuclearization, that means North Korea is kind of recognized as a nuclear state. And I think with that kind of confidence, they are ready to really talk on the same term. And they have already started not to do unnecessarily provocative name-calling and broadcast and so forth. So this is really a very, very productive process, in my opinion. And
all right. Professor Shen, it seems, after my direct questions to the other guests, whether it is about inter-Korean talks or it's about DPRK-US summit, neither of the two guests will be able to come up with any possible concrete steps taken by two sides about so-called a roadmap of denuclearization. So I have to come to you, Professor Shen, from China. You said earlier, China is interested in making sure this would happen and in helping to draw up this plan. But Professor Shen, exactly how? Today, Professor Shen, the Foreign Minister, State Councilor Wang Yi, rather, talking about two things China is going to do. Making sure China will play a role in the economic development that the DPRK has pledged for its own future. Secondly, in the security guarantee that DPRK is seeking about its future. So exactly what's going to be the role of China in these two areas? Professor Shen.
Well, for economic development, China has a lot to render its expertise and resource available. For instance, Belt and Road Initiative. And at a time when the situation is mature, DPRK is abiding by the new agreement to abandon its nuclear weapon properly, and international community may decide at the platform UN Security Council to lift some of the sanctions, all sanctions. Our Road and Belt Initiative may extend to Pyongyang to help it to build up its airport, seaport, road, and highway. That would help North Korea to boost its infrastructure, which would form the base of economic recovery. We can partner with South Korea, with America, with other friends, and we can do it bilaterally with North Korea, as long as the UN Security Council would think proper. And for security kind of international guarantee, North Korea may feel not certain. What about North Korea abandon all, like Libya abandoned all nuclear weapon program? It's not a mature program, but a still program. Then the West, the NATO, would attack it to change the regime. A few days ago, Mr. John Bolton said the U.S. would expect DPRK's denuclearization, a version of the Libya model. A Libya model means later on, Libya government will be toppled. So North Korea would have the concern hearing this. China may say, don't worry, we would work with the U.S. We would not allow the U.S. to attack you. And we would partner with the U.S. and other countries like Russia, etc., to guarantee that the Korean Peninsula would be secure, would be safe, would be fair, given the P5's security protection and the UN Security Council's collective security provision. So China should play a major role in this crucial stage in assuring DPRK would have the courage, would have no concern to abandon all its nuclear weaponry.
Here's the thing, Mr. Walsh, after listening to Professor Shen. You know, in the massive media reporting over the past 2 days, people are talking about, quote unquote, China tries to have a role in the issue of the nuclear on the Korean Peninsula. This is quite a dramatic change of use of words compared to, let's just say, a month ago, when the world media, quote unquote, was accusing China of not playing enough role in making things to happen. So what have happened just over 1 month's time dramatically that has made China's role from playing too much or not enough now to playing as much as possible? Mr. Walsh, how should we understand this? If I could recall, China was the one that proposed double suspense. China was the one that was proposing the parallel approaches on the DPRK nuclear issue vis-a-vis DPRK's relations with South Korea and also the United States. Mr. Walsh, help us to understand this.
Well, I wish I could. I did notice the reporting that you suggested. I would say both the New York Times and Reuters had media reporting that sort of suggested that China was worried about being left out or that sort of thing. I just think that's absurd, and I don't know why the reporting has turned in that direction. I don't think anything has fundamentally changed. Here are the fundamentals, and it's consistent with your colleague in Beijing there. China has a central role. It has a central role primarily, not only legally because of the armistice agreement, but politically and in terms of security because China is North Korea's most important ally. And so if there's going to be an agreement that involves economic benefits for North Korea, and that's what they're going to want economic benefits in return for restraints on the nuclear program, China has to be part of that answer, either directly or indirectly, because 90% of the trade is with China. And then politically, obviously, being a great power, China is pretty much the only one that can go to North Korea and offer reassurance, saying, if North Korea, if you follow through and do what you're supposed to do, don't worry, China, will make sure all the other parties do what they're supposed to do. You should have the courage to go forward because I will back you. That political reassurance and security reassurance is central. So I don't think, you know, I've always sort of thought that China, the four main parties, China, South Korea, the U.S., and North Korea, they've always been important. They'll continue to be important. And there's going to be no agreement unless all four of them are happy with the outcome. So that's the way I look at it.
Interesting that you talk about four of them. Let me go to Dr. Kim Renaud. There is a debate now about under what format the negotiation will take place. Will they work out just bilateral, whether North and South or U.S. and North? Or it's going to be trilateral or probably quadrilateral, which is four-party talks, or probably even expanding to the original format, which is six-party talks. This is not a game of numbers, but rather a game of stakeholders. And how will they work, and what will be their role? Dr. Kim Renaud, at this point, when Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited Pyongyang, what do you think will be the format for the future?
Well, I think it should be the most significant aspect of this development is the two Koreas began talk to each other, and then started with a notion they have very strong blood relations, which should be the cause for really to seek peace and resolve whatever conflict they have been under. So I think this has been a very interesting development to the whole world, and that wouldn't hold unless we sort of are recognized worldwide as something significant as, as it has
but
been.
Dr. Kim Renaud, I do have an immediate follow-up question for you. Just let me give you an example.
Yes.
If you say, let the two Koreas work it out, there's already one issue. The U.S. should have its military still there in South Korea or not. North Korea said, you know, if we have denuclearization, we have peace treaty, why do we need so-called American troops in South Korea? Then the South Koreans are saying, well, in order to maintain that ally relationship with the United States and have security guarantee for South Korea, the U.S. troops cannot go. So already one issue there that the North and the South on their own would not be able to resolve, I'm afraid. Dr. Kim Renaud.
Right. Of course, they cannot resolve only by themselves, because this is really not just a Korean Peninsula issue, because this is a last place where the Cold War still continues. And in that sense, it is a world affair, not just Korean Peninsula affair. And that China and the other big countries surrounding Korea should all be involved is just the most natural thing.
All right. Professor Shen, under what format do you think, sir, things should take place that would make things happen in the most efficient and positive way?
Well, I think with the improvement of inter-Korean relations, North Korea may be more confident to abandon its nuclear weapon over time. And this would also help South Korea to build its confidence of national security. Given this situation, South Korea would feel less threat. Russia is not going to invade South Korea, and China are strategic partner of South Korea. China and South Korea have problem over Assad, but Assad is a U.S.-South Korean response to North Korea's nuclear and missile development. If North Korea would abandon nuclear weapon, abandon ICBM, and over time would curtail its short-range ballistic missile, really the U.S. would have less justification to stay in a Korean Peninsula. But as Ms. Reynolds mentioned, this is a matter of Cold War, a matter of a regional security order in the entire Northeast Asia, which means U.S. has an eye over the entire Northeast Asia by using its force deployed in the territory of the current South Korea. Then U.S. need to revamp its such a Cold War mentality. U.S. force in South Korea should only be used for one purpose, to defend South Korea, should not be used for other purpose. And the South Korean government should not allow the U.S. to use its force deployed in South Korea for more than purpose than to defend South Korea against North Korea. So President Moon should listen to his dear colleague, Professor Moon, that they need to reflect upon the role of U.S. military presence in the region in a forward-looking approach, rather than sticking to Cold War.
There we go. Mr. Wash, this is almost reaching the point of a moment of truth. Remember, earlier there was the issue of the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula, and the North was reluctant to commit. Now there is willingness coming from North, Pyongyang, to commit denuclearization. Now, it is a test for all parties as to what they are really having in mind when it comes to the agenda of the region. Mr. Wash, what is your observation in that regard? Show the cards.
Well, I'll say this. Most of my colleagues are skeptical. Most of my security colleagues in the United States are skeptical that Kim wants to give up his nuclear weapons, and I think that this is just a stratagem on the part of North Korea to get what it wants and to divide the U.S. and South Korea. That is the majority view here in the U.S., I think. My own view is somewhat different. My own view is we don't know. We need to test this proposition. We won't know until the parties sit down at the negotiating table who is really serious about what. But I will say this. While we haven't started the negotiations yet, so we don't know the answer to that question, you have to say that based on the actions and words so far, it's pretty clear that all the parties want the U.S.-North Korea summit to go well. North Korea and South Korea are bending over backwards with announcements and ideas with the hope that this summit will go well. So certainly the North Koreans are committed to a positive summit. Maybe that means they're committed to denuclearization. Maybe it means not that. But I'm looking forward. You're right. It will be a momentous time in Korean history when they have that summit. Anything could happen. But I'll disagree with my colleagues and say one of the this could go somewhere. We should not prejudge it and expect it to fail. We should encourage the parties to have this momentum, and then hopefully something positive will come. But we're not quite there yet. They have to still sit down and talk. That's when the hard work begins.
We're already getting hyper excited before even a draft of the roadmap could ever come out. But before we go, every one of you have 10 seconds. What is likely to be the thing you are going to watch most closely to judge where the momentum is? Professor Shen, you go first. 10 seconds.
Well, for the upcoming Trump and Kim Jong Un meeting, I hope they would work genuinely with a mutual compromise for action for action. Not the DPRK would do CVID in a lump sum, and the U.S. would do nothing. That would make North Korea reluctant to cooperate. They should make a cooperation, rather than one side wins all and the other side would lose all. I hope the two leaders would show their leadership.
Show their leadership. Dr. Kim Renaud, 10 seconds if you can, ma'am.
I hope the two leaders will approach the negotiation table with a true sense of sincerity, a very important word in Korea, culturally and historically. And in spite of whatever has happened thus far, they should trust what is said is really meant. So with that premise, there will be hope.
Mr. Wash, last but not least.
Yeah, I'm looking for one thing. I'm looking at one thing. President Trump's emotion and demeanor. Coming out of this meeting, if he's happy about it, says things like, if this was the best meeting ever, you know, no one's ever done this before, this agreement looks really great. You know, emotionally, if he's taking ownership of what happened in the summit, I think that's a very good sign. By contrast, if he comes out and doesn't say very much and doesn't show any positive emotion, then I'm going to have concerns about how things go forward.
You know what? I think all of you have a point over there, legitimate point over there in your hope. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this discussion. Professor Shen Ding Li, Dr. Yang Ki Kim Renal, and Mr. Jim Walsh. Really appreciate it.